I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Parul Jain, Practice Director, is a member of the Global Sourcing team and assists clients on topics related to service delivery portfolio optimization, benchmarking, operational review, and growth strategy. Rita Ansoni is Everest Group's Principal Analyst for Impact Sourcing and Sustainability. Her focus delivers a triple bottom line lens of people, planet, and profits to global services market research, beginning with an in-depth examination into impact sourcing. Shahil Lumba, Senior Analyst, is a member of the Sourcing and Vendor Management team and assists clients on topics related to strategic sourcing, category management, vendor management, and RFX events across industries. He is also actively involved and driving initiatives in the areas of impact sourcing and sustainability. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Rita.
Thank you so much, Raphael. And I want to welcome everyone that's attending. There's nearly 100 folks that have joined us. And, you know, I'm guessing from the topic that we're discussing from around the world. So we're really excited to have you. This webinar is on the heels of publishing our first impact sourcing specialist state of the market. The work is in the context, this work is in the context of our overall research practice at Everest Group. However, there's a twist to this work in the sense that we really are focused on advocating this model, not because it's a charitable activity, but because it combines both the right thing to do and a good thing to do. So the webinar is going to be in 3 parts. We're going to level set on the meaning of impact sourcing. I know for some of us, that's a conversation we've had multiple times. And then second, we're going to put the talent model into the context of our current people challenges across the globe. And finally, we're going to hone in on the point of this bridging business and doing good, really getting into the social impact and the scale at which impact sourcing has gotten since we started looking at this conversation. So to get us started, Parul is going to get us started on talking about the obvious challenges.
Thanks, Rita. Before I get started on this, happy Women's Day to all. Quite lucky that this coincided with the date of the webinar. Yes, so getting into more details here, I think back in January 2020, when we basically spoke with a lot of our C-level execs, they reported that the #1 internal issue has been attracting and retaining top talent. Now, more than 24 months later, as we see economies emerging, after COVID vaccine rollouts, this still continues to be a challenge, and the concern is even deeper. Now, the predictable supply-demand cycle seems to be a thing of the past. The economic cyclical ups and downs, regardless of that, companies are still struggling to find people with the right skills, in the right numbers at the right time. And this is holding them back to achieve their planned growth for this year and for the next as well. At the same time, we have abundance of workforce who's not just available, but also capable to bridge that gap. If you talk about US, there's about 27 million people, part of the hidden workforce, who would gladly and capably fill those jobs. But because of hiring practices, AI-based algorithms and screening engines, the applications of this diverse group more often than not go straight to the rejection pile. We believe corporate leaders could kind of solve these labor problems if they gave these workers a closer look, gain a real advantage over their competitors who are unwilling to do so, and at the same time improve their workplace diversity. So when you look at locations like South Africa, Costa Rica, very much mature on the global services front, still facing high unemployment rate, I think that's an area where companies can look at, change their mindset, look at it from a potential standpoint, make dedicated investments and then harness the youth workforce that's there. Okay, before getting into the exact definition, let's kind of address, let's take a quick check and run a quick poll here. We have listed a couple of hypothesis statements here. Please select true or false based on what you believe are the most appropriate options. We have about a minute to do so. The quick poll should be popping up on your screens. In the meanwhile, Rita, you've been advocating for impact sourcing for decades now. I'm sure you've come across some misconceptions related to impact sourcing. Would you want to elaborate a couple of them, the most prominent ones that you heard?
Sure. I think you touched on it on the previous slide. I think locations is one of the most interesting misconceptions that we've demolished with a lot of our research. We started this journey on talking about impact sourcing in looking at the business case for impact sourcing. And so I think another misconception is that there's been just limited business case of doing impact sourcing, but in fact, we've seen even more reasons to do this.
Interesting. I see the answers polling in. We'll just wait for another 20 seconds and then discuss the results from here. Couple of interesting results here that I'm seeing, but I'll just wait for a couple of more seconds that I get into the results here.
Yeah, only about half of our participants have chimed in, but even with half, I think there's an interesting trend that's happening. I'm glad we only limited it to the 4 points. We had initially had a lot more things that we thought we'd test our audience with. So.
Okay, and we have the results here. Great. So we look at the first one, impact sourcing part of the CSR and philanthropy. I think the results are divided here, 60-40 that you see. Specialists being too small for mainstream. I think this is the one which we're going to head on demolish through our research today and the findings that we have. Business and cost objectives, I'm glad. I'm just happy to see the results here, honestly. And yes, the last one related to automation. Definitely, I think most of our audience is already on board. Any particular call outs, Rita, that you would want to make?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure folks, when they were answering this, knew the answers that we were hoping that they would give, but I think this was an honest polling, especially on the idea that this is coming from a CSR philanthropic movement, and no doubt a lot of companies began with that notion. But I think from the research that folks will see, both on 1 and 2, that these are definitely misconceptions and are getting solved with what's happened over time. So to get us started further into this, I thought it would be useful to bring us into the overarching purpose framework that Everest Group has created as our definition for sustainability. The conversation around talent, the conversation around impact sourcing is within a broader conversation. So we thought it would be nice to share our model. So what we've done here is we've combined the idea of a triple bottom line, or people, planet, profits, with the emergence of ESG, or environment, social, and governance conversations, including the equating profit with the business case and governance with monitoring, which is a lot more within the area of our global services industry. The image really highlights the major areas of activity for us, which is planet and the environment, people and social. For example, and for examples that we've given, obviously there is a lot here, and it's still not exhaustive, but the examples of decarbonization and the other kinds of environmental issues are depicted here. But to our minds, environmental issues while they are super important, they're relatively easy to identify, benchmark, and even assess. The social benefits, the right-hand side of our picture, is a little harder. Identifying where companies have potential impact, whether it's positive or negative. So from our standpoint, a lot of the focus for this industry, it's a people-driven industry, is on the people side, and that's squarely where impact sourcing fits in. Kind of going back to even our polling questions, the other piece that's really important, the profit side, we've really divided it into two areas, both profitability of a particular service offering and a competitive differentiation of an institution. Both aspects include infusing sustainability into their own operations, products, and services, or they're about creating specialized sustainability efforts, putting an extra effort in that area. Enterprises are already creating products and services that promote and mitigate environmental and social impact. We're really saying that here that it's the role of providers to demonstrate that they're also contributing to those solutions. And then finally, monitoring and governance. We have the examples here that are more along the lines of how boards operate, the kind of reporting activities that are happening, et cetera. Now that you know where impact sourcing fits in, I'd like to get us into the broader definition of what impact sourcing is and where things stand a deep dive into it.
So essentially, how we define impact sourcing is the business practice to intentionally hire and provide career development opportunities to people from different marginalized communities. Essentially, I would like to place emphasis on the word intentional. A lot of companies, enterprises, providers, both are hiring workers which may be from marginalized communities. However, their intention and the emphasis that they place on their career development kind of helps them classify between impact sourcing here in particular. And just to think about the communities that contribute to these workforce, what we've done here is divided them into 4 groups. When you look at impact sourcing, it could be one from economically disadvantaged groups, people basically below poverty lines, marginally housed communities, so on and so forth, people from the socially marginalized groups, so all the minority communities, survivors of gender-based violence, etc. Third important group is around the under or the unemployed groups. So people with disabilities, veterans, older adults, and there are, by the way, dedicated specialists who are focusing, say, just on one subcategory versus the other. And we've interacted with them as part of the study as well. For instance, one specialist primarily focuses on people with autistic disabilities. There are some who are just focusing on veterans, etc. We will come to more examples throughout the webinar here. The fourth group is the other group, which basically has unique factors of employability. So people are with refugees, single parents, etc. But the key is that this definition varies across locations, across continents. And if we talk more about the different definitions or used by the specialist on the next slide, we look at the diversity here. So essentially, think about bitwise, including geographies across the continent, including people who are demographically underrepresented in the tech industry. You talk about humans in the loop, who's basically looking at workers from affected backgrounds, refugees, asylum seekers, not just in Bulgaria where they're operating, but also in Syria, in Turkey, in Lebanon. We've got specialists like B2R who are looking only at, focused looking at the youth, the unemployed youth, the rural educated youth in different regions, in different cities across India. Moving on, if we go to slide 9, we then talk about the ecosystem that exists, which helps enable or accelerate the impact of impact sourcing. So essentially, the way we see it, there are three key distinct entities. The first one being the employers, who are either directly or indirectly engaging or providing employment to the impact sourcing workforce. So think about the specialists. And when we've been using the term specialist quite a bit, so let me just spend some time on how we define specialist. Specialists are primarily organizations where their primary strategy to hire talent relies on impact sourcing, where their primary focus, their intentional focus is on impact sourcing workforce. In addition to that, we've got traditional outsourcing service providers, the global players, the likes of Teleperformance, Sutherland, Genpact, Citel, etc. And then there are direct buyers or enterprises, including both their shared services and GBS. And we've heard some of the good work by Google, AWS, Microsoft, Tata, and there are many more logos that we can count here. This is on the employer side. Then the second entity is the enablers. Essentially all the bodies that are helping the workers or the employers get in touch with the workers and kind of helping orchestrating this entire ecosystem. So people, the training institutes, the likes of, and they're different across regions. We've got the NASCOM Foundation in India, Harambe is quite active in the Africa region, you've got SCOL in US. The government and industry associations, the certification bodies, which basically helps for unknown people getting, if they don't know which specialist has what kind of certifications, just add more authenticity to already the good work being done there. Rita, any particular call outs, nuances, examples that you wanted to share here?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment more on saying that this picture is really demonstrating how to break down systemic barriers of exclusion, you really do need a village. I think it's also very exciting to me, having been involved with this since the definition, since the term was created, to start seeing even more logos populating this slide. And I think it's a foreshadow to what we'll talk about later, which is more of how this has become a global movement and it's mainstream. But I thought I'd pull out three interesting examples, because we've got our enablers right there in the middle and kind of how they're interacting with others. So on the training side, we have companies like FTES, which works in small town India. They are doing their recruitment via Untapped Foundation and doing the training, etc. We've got companies like People Shores based here in the United States that have an entire ecosystem within the Mississippi Valley that is enabling and connecting them to the impact sourcing workers. And then within the certification bodies, we've got companies like DDD and several others in process to become B Corps. B Corp is a globally recognized certification. It's pretty rigorous. And that's over and above what's already happened, very specially in our industry of the Global Impact Sourcing Coalition having created a standards framework. So I think it's just very exciting to see the number of players and what we can do going forward with this.
Great. I think that kind of puts us in a good segue where we're talking about numbers right now. So where do we stand in terms of the overall market? And what we've done here is kind of done a thorough threefold assessment to estimate the overall market size. We ran a dedicated RFP for impact sourcing specialists, ran a survey, speaking with a lot of traditional service providers, validated the entire all information via briefing calls, plugged in gaps via dedicated research. And the way we're looking at it is right now, the overall market stands at about 350,000 odd FTEs. FTEs essentially means full-time equivalents or employees. Majority of them are currently part of the large global traditional outsourcing service providers, so roughly 85% there. 15% of them reside with the specialist, as what we described as where the primary talent strategy is hiring impact workers. Sahil, you've been close to the analysis in working on this day in, day out. What kind of insights do you have that you would want to share here?
Yeah, Parul, I think you rightly pointed out the approach that we have taken. So we gathered a comprehensive sort of data from all these specialists and even reaching out to service providers as well. But while interacting with some of these impact sourcing specialists, I guess we came across some tremendous growth journeys. And I want to call out some of them, like while interacting with rural sourcing, which is an Atlanta-based impact sourcing, they saw a revenue growth of almost like 1.4x. And even some impact sourcing specialists, if I can recall, in US, they are actually looking to expand their locations from 9 cities to 45 cities. So this space is actually seeing a huge growth in terms of some impact sourcing specialists. And all this is because they are leading the way and innovating this space through increased engagements over the past couple of years.
Absolutely. In fact, I think one call out which I would want to make here, all of these numbers correspond to intentional impact sourcing. Now we understand several other players may be leveraging the impact sourcing workforce, but that remains unintentional. And then just to put things out there in perspective, the overall global sourcing market stands roughly about 8.2 million FTEs. Majority of them would be doing unintentional hiring. So if you were to account for that, imagine the magnitude at what this could be sitting at. Right now we have a penetration of about 4 to 5%. This could be 10%, 15% out for everyone to see. But we do hope that us advocating and as awareness increases for impact sourcing, the intentional impact is going to increase. And companies are going to think about this more extensively, dedicatedly here. With that, let's get into the next piece of our webinar, talking about the talent side of things. So we've been running the key issue survey for a couple of years now. One of the things we consistently ask is, what are the key business challenges that people are facing as they enter a new year? Not surprisingly, talent has been the strongest challenge for 2022 and it's risen up the ranks. And this is not just in say, I'm not able to find the right talent, but this is also about the cost of not finding the right talent at the right time. Now, this talent shortage has manifested in rising salaries, higher attrition, service providers asking for mid-cycle wage revisions, etc. All of that kind of troubling and bubbling into multiple challenges. Now, once you break it down and you talk about how does impact sourcing help to kind of bridge this gap, I'd like to call in Rita to talk about some of the benefits or how impact sourcing might put this problem to some bit of an ease.
I was about to be the first person to do the unmuting thing. I'm sorry, I was distracted by the questions that are getting asked, which is great. I want to encourage folks to ask more questions. What was your question, Parul?
I was basically checking in. So would you like to share some insights around how impact sourcing is helping to meet the, to basically solve for the talent shortage? What kind of benefits can people expect if they were to leverage impact sourcing?
Got it. And I think it's related actually to the question we were just asked, which is this about the size of your institution versus, our smaller companies less able to leverage an impact sourcing workforce? So I would say, and my answer is absolutely not, that there really is no barrier in terms of size, because we know that there's been unintentional hiring within impact worker workforces. But the fact is that if you're intentional about it, that is a whole new pool of talent that can be accessed for the gaps that you have in your strategy at the moment. And in addition, we're already seeing the emergence of D&I initiatives. And most of those initiatives tend to focus in on the D as opposed to the I. And what we're really talking about here in impact sourcing is how to integrate the I. So taking a cue from that question, impact sourcing is given the access to new talent that we're talking about. We really get into what are the marrying the business and, whoops, I think we're on the wrong slide. So sorry. Proving the approach to impact sourcing, we really have a three-pronged approach of saying that there's a talent part of the strategy, there's actual business advantage of the strategy, and there is meeting your corporate citizenship goals. We've talked about it already. I think the untapped talent and the fact that there's a large workforce out there, but also keeping in mind that the impact sourcing talent we've already seen is a stable and very engaged workforce. The business benefits, the business case of impact sourcing goes back to a longer term idea of cost savings because there's less turnover. The service delivery is very reliable because there's an actual hunger often in the case of impact workers. And then, of course, there's a bigger picture improvement to your brand. And we've seen that in some of the traditional players. And this is a start to get into emerging markets where businesses are already beginning to operate. We also talk about generally corporate citizenship, that there is this emergence of, and I think post or as we're coming out of the pandemic, we see a lot more focus on corporate citizenship as a mainstream part of business, as a board level conversation. And this model clearly has a positive social impact. It gives businesses more of a social license to operate and engage within communities. And in some cases, particularly if you're moving the work to where the workers are, you're having a positive environmental impact. Parul, I think you've been in on some of the interesting calls that we've been having with buyers and buyer reference calls. Do tell us about some of that experience.
Absolutely. I think it has been an eye-opening or a more discovery journey for myself, though I've been associated or read about impact sourcing for quite a while, but the good work that is being done out there is quite fascinating, to be honest. I'd like to definitely draw attention to one key finding that I had across multiple calls that we've attended. I think we've been underplaying, in fact, the business advantages, especially in the times where people are reporting north of 20% attrition. I recall at least 4 impact sourcing specialists citing that their attrition is less than 6% annually, which was astounding. And this is across geographies, across services, across different seniority levels. I think definitely here overall higher tenure in the firm, and then people are very happy with the kind of outputs they're receiving. So definitely, I mean, if people haven't thought about it seriously, they should give a more kind of a focused attention on the business objectives that you can achieve from impact sourcing.
I realize this might be a little bit of a busy slide, but I'm so excited to present it. When I first started talking about impact sourcing in 2012, when it was codified by the Rockefeller Foundation, to today, specialists have truly globalized the movement. We're still seeing a larger concentration in the APAC region, with 58% of impact workers concentrated in APAC. India still having a large percentage of that concentration, followed by Africa, where, as you can see, many more countries are getting tapped for resources and activities within the continent. It's certainly part of the Rockefeller Digital Jobs Africa movement, but even beyond, seeing opportunities in each of these countries. The newest geography in many ways is our third geography, which is North America, pretty much the United States. And this has come from the emergence of social entrepreneurs really bridging a lot of their work and coming into the global services industry with this focus. And again, keep in mind, we're talking about impact sourcing specialists. This is not where traditional players are. We're really focused in on the specialists. Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. Latin America, we're seeing fewer countries leverage, but I think a lot of that is because traditional players have actually adopted much of the model, like Sutherland and many others. Therefore, the enterprises, the social enterprises, are fewer. In Europe, I guess today it feels like something very important to point out that that's where we're seeing a lot of the work on the refugee crisis. And it's not just a crisis of today, it's been a crisis for a long time. And with the focus on that community, there's more of a sense of, can we not be short-term minded in this crisis mode? Can we think longer term? Are there geographies where folks are moving from into where there are talent shortages and there's a potential for more activities or more employment in those countries? Moving to the broader context of the talent mystery or the talent shortage, we go into, we're really seeing inclusion as a part of the talent crisis. Whether you call it impact sourcing or not, it really has become something of a conversation. And we've grouped it into these three sort of silly names, but good names, I think, descriptive names. In your backyard is really thinking about those invisible people that we've really honed in on. 27 million hidden workers across the United States, and companies like Infosys talking about recruiting specifically from community colleges, and others looking to work inside of high schools and prepare people. There's also targeted excluded communities right here in our own backyards, like women and persons with disabilities, the LGBTQ movement, veterans, and we see a lot of this happening already. What we mean by in your neighbor's backyard is there are existing delivery locations where there are also invisible people that we're saying are in your backyard. This is where we're talking about, again, the similar idea of recruiting from community and technical colleges. If there's a vision to look at increasing the education mix of where you're recruiting from, developing under-resourced geographies, such as rural areas and the urban poor. And again, newer targeted marginalized communities like the refugee crisis, like incarcerated folks and indigenous community. And finally, in these undiscovered locations, we like to say that the world is really your oyster. And we've seen examples of this. We've seen, as you saw on the previous slide, many African countries being explored for this kind of work, and that happening to be also where we're seeing true population pyramids and improving economic development. India's rural population still continues to be severely untapped. We do know of specialists that are working there, but the numbers are huge, 898 million people that are growing in education. And then we know that there's a lot more workforce development agencies, both public sector and nonprofit, that are upskilling the workforce across the world. And finally, I think one of the biggest impacts that we want to talk about when we think about inclusion is the informal workforce. The way of really sharing the wealth, sharing economic development is to formalize workforces, and bringing people into this growing formal economy is really the objective. So now that you're convinced that inclusion is such an important part of your strategy, let us get into, Sahil's going to get us into what's the kind of work that people can do from the impact sourcing space.
Sure. So we have seen, like, conventionally, there has been high adoption of impact sourcing, basically for the basic and transactional nature of work, which requires limited domain expertise, so to say. But over the past couple of years, what we have been observing that these, along with the conventional work roles, these work activities are getting evolved and they are moving up the value chain with an added layer of complexity. Special focus on the data enabling or the digital enabling and tech related services. This has been gaining high traction over the past couple of years, wherein impact sourcing specialists have been building some capabilities around data annotation kind of services, and that too across industries. So whether be it e-commerce, fintech, or even the gaming industries, we have seen high traction of such data and tech enabled services. Moreover, these impact sourcing specialists are also kind of investing and developing their in-house or proprietary tools and technologies to innovate these solutions even further and competing in the space with traditional service providers. So we have seen some technologies building around, let's say, text recognition, or some workflow platforms have been created along with the services elements. So they're combining these solutions to provide such innovative solutions overall. So this space is evolving in this space, I would say, and it's great to see these specialists also competing with the traditional service providers. So we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll see how the overall landscape actually looks like. So as I already mentioned, so this slide depicts that how different impact sourcing specialists have been developing some sort of expertise and capabilities around, or rather across services, be it IT services. BPS has been there conventionally, but we have seen a lot of traction and attraction towards the digital services space as well, where these service providers have been gaining traction because of obviously the rise in AI ML adoption globally.
Yeah, and I think one thing to celebrate on this slide is these are the logos of the 21 companies that participated in depth in our RFI process. And I just really want to thank them for this kind of opening up of their books and their hearts to share this work. There's over $1 billion of revenue just sitting here on this page. And I think that is just fantastic news given where we've come from. There's also within this, there would have been even more logos, but there's been M&A activities, investment activities, and other things that have really spurred this space to say that it's not just that there are the numbers of people that are growing, but the areas of operation. And note that we said here predominantly, we are seeing other areas of work emerging for a lot of these companies. And I think the next time we do this presentation, it's going to be even more crowded. So now getting to maybe the most interesting part of this webinar for some people, we would love to work with you and give you some further details into the kind of work that we're doing and the things that we've learned. So how is it that you can enable your impact sourcing journey? So this is what we call our CTAs, our call to action. Please, answer the poll questions if you're interested in getting help to answer these questions. And what I've also really been emphasizing, I think we've seen a nice mix of interest in both the providers, the specialist providers and the traditional providers, as well as those that are actually buying the services, because as we started off our conversation, I think the ESG activities that are happening within enterprises is only growing, and they could use every help in meeting the goals, the great goals that they're setting, and the supply chain is an important part of that.
Anita, while we're getting responses, I think we're getting a couple of questions. So one interesting question from Keith that has come in. I'm interested in your thoughts on the need to move beyond traditional selection proxies such as qualifications and experience towards potential and skills. I think that's a very interesting thought here, and we're already seeing some movement on these lines. So people, leaders in US already not hiring, just expanding their limits and hiring directly from community colleges, not just looking at fancy degrees, qualifications, but entirely basing it on aptitude and potential and skills that people can demonstrate. We've also seen some advancement in how people are looking at their AI-based screening engines, giving it a human face, human touch, and ensuring that they are not missing out on the talent in an already talent-flat situation. So lots of good work being there. And let's move on to the next segment now on basically talking and thinking about how can you actually create impact, right? What are the different models or the frameworks that people need to get into place?
Yeah. So in this section, we'll talk about, let's say, how to put impact sourcing into practice. So this slide actually talks about the overall ecosystem that we already discussed, but it talks about the engagement models, how different entities in the ecosystem actually engage with each other. So we can see there is a close association of all three entities, which is impact sourcing workers, which are looking or seeking career development opportunities or employment opportunities. There are impact sourcing employers who can hire impact workers directly or indirectly. And there are impact sourcing enablers who act as promoters to the overall concept, right? So impact sourcing employers can actually engage with impact sourcing workers through primarily three service delivery models. They could hire directly, which is called in-house employment. They can go to, let's say, they could hire local people from local communities, or they could go to community colleges to hire people. So this could be intentional or unintentional hiring, so to say. Then they could also outsource their services by identifying their service elements, which they can outsource directly to impact sourcing specialists, or they could also outsource to traditional outsourcing service providers, which have good amount of focus on impact sourcing. So the third element could be subcontracting, wherein enterprises actually outsource their traditional or outsource their services to traditional outsourcing service providers. But these traditional outsourcing service providers in turn actually subcontracts them or the services to the impact sourcing specialists. So this actually acts as an extension to a traditional outsourcing engagements. Then there is the third entity, which is impact sourcing enablers, and this forms a critical element because they are the promoter of the ecosystem. So they influence policies or maybe the training programs or the regulatory frameworks in order to promote and incentivize the overall ecosystem, right? For example, we have seen Harambee doing a great work in South Africa. They have been promoting youth employment opportunities and been doing a great work. So it's pertinent that IS enablers can actually bring in a positive environment for the whole ecosystem of impact sourcing. Yeah. Now I'll go to the next slide in order to understand each of these service delivery models through examples. So under in-house employment, as I already mentioned, so Teleperformance, which is a customer experience management firm, service provider, they actually rolled out offers to refugees in Colombia, which is a direct employment opportunities for these guys, right? And then in the direct outsourcing model, there has been a US-based impact sourcing specialist, Untapped, which has actually stepped up during pandemic to create a solution for a help desk for the work from home agents for a Fortune 500 health insurance client. Then subcontracting model, so large service providers or traditional service providers actually subcontract some of their elements to some of these impact sourcing specialists. Bitwise Industries and B2R have been doing some work around this space in the subcontracting model with these traditional service providers. If we can move to the next slide. So this slide is really, I mean, it's the gist of all the discussions that we were having. So it talks about, let's say, the evolution of impact sourcing in terms of the maturity level and the engagement level. So as we move from left to right, we see that as the maturity increases, the engagement actually evolves from low cost to a more strategic level of partnerships with the enterprises, right? This model actually helps you position your impact sourcing journey, or it can actually define your impact sourcing journey. So even from an objective point, impact sourcing 1.0 is at a very nascent stage. Or let's say you can start your journey from impact sourcing 1.0, which starts from a social objective, and it could move to a more future looking stage, which is like impact sourcing 3.0, which brings in more like business differentiation objectives. And most of the mature impact sourcing specialists, I would say, still lie between 2 to 3 level, and they're still kind of investing around their tools and technology and services, building out capabilities and expertise to reach that impact sourcing 3.0, where they can leverage the overall differentiation advantage by, or rather through, engagements with the enterprises.
I think, sorry, wanted to just quickly comment on this, because to my mind, this model and this framing of maturity is probably one of the most important outcomes of our research. What it shows is both that there's maturity in terms of the kind of impact and the way that businesses are operating, but there's probably a third dimension on here where it's actually about the kind of business benefits and the social benefits that are happening as we move up to 3.0. I think 3.0 to me is about the art of possibility, and that's quoting a friend. It's forward looking, and it's about also pushing the envelope. And we are seeing it. So it's not as though we're really putting a projection out there. We have companies like iMerit, a specialist based in India, Bhutan, and the United States, where they're less of a GBS company and more of a technology company, where they're leveraging their skill set and their services to push the envelope in AI and ML work. We have companies like WebHelp, a traditional CX provider, where every single office has a localized version of impact sourcing. And they have an overall company goal that within the next 10 years, that 30% of their workforce will be identified as impact workers in one way, shape, or form. So to my mind, yes, we are still on that projection, and a lot of businesses that we've talked to are in between, but that's kind of the ultimate and the pinnacle of where we would like to get to.
Yep. So while evaluating the space, impact sourcing space, and even interacting with some of these impact sourcing specialists and even some enterprises, we came across some key challenges around this space, which can be broadly bucketed into 3 segments. It could be talent-based, business issues, or delivery issues, right? Around the talent, so some specialists have talked about challenges around access to right talent, which they pertains because of the significant portion of this talent is actually remote. Also the high training costs to some extent, because these resources require continuous skilling and upskilling because of the ever-changing skill requirements. However, this space, we have been seeing changes because there has been some robust hiring trends, and there have been some strategic partnerships going on with, let's say, the IS enablers that we talked earlier, maybe some NGOs or training institutes, which can actually make these training programs more robust or hiring programs more robust. So these challenges can be worked around through those strategic partnerships with them. And then on the business side, since most of the impact sourcing specialists, they actually focus on low value commoditized services, which has like limited sustainable competitive advantage. And to some extent, this also links to a limited awareness in the market, because market perception is more around more social, less business side of this impact sourcing. However, there has been growing awareness around this concept, and there has been changing around, let's say, the space is evolving from price sensitivity to more like business value that these impact sourcing specialists have been creating through the engagements with enterprises. And the third bucket is the delivery issues. Again, because of the ever required training programs, there is a high lead time to start. And because of the transactional nature of work, sometimes there is lack of impact measurement. But there have been some works around creating some scorecards wherein we can measure their impact, or rather tangible impacts, through these scorecards. We'll discuss about some of the mitigation plans in the subsequent slide. If you can move, Chiara.
And then while we get into the mitigation plans here, I think one question we're also getting here from Mike is, can you comment on the organizational change management that's required to align hiring managers with intentional impact sourcing? So that's one of the other challenges we've been hearing, that, hey, yes, we need to do this, but how do you get the entire team on board, specifically around recruiting, shortlisting them, ensuring that the success is kind of guaranteed with all the right measures in place. I think as long as impact sourcing is defined as simply a way to give back, the impact is going to be limited. If it's defined as a normal course of business activity where we recruit, develop talent from this population with a well thought out, like a clear-eyed program, just the way we'd hire engineers in India from IIT or in US from MIT, I think then we're in the money. We're going to give the hiring managers extensive commitment. Companies that get good at this are think about it professionally and then kind of sees more in tangible returns, both in terms of employee engagement, satisfaction, and also business objectives.
Yeah, and even some of the practices that we have seen in the market is there has been some optimum mix around hiring talent. So there have been a hybrid model going on wherein some organizations hire directly from communities, and they also hire through external partnerships wherein they tie up with some NGOs or training institutes to create specialized training programs or robust training programs, right? And again, around the businesses, there have been some, we talked about some expansion plans as well of the impact sourcing specialists. So these specialists have been identifying expanding operations in unconventional markets, wherein we have some good amount of work going on because of the impact sourcing enablers doing a great work there. On the delivery side, they need to create and invest in some ready to start programs to enable quick starts. And also effective skill mapping exercise is important to identify and groom workers accordingly. So again, the focus should be on service delivery and differentiation rather than just the social objective of impact sourcing. That's the highlight here.
Great. So we've got 5 minutes left and 5 success drivers to talk about and do our Q&A. But so I did want to spend a minute really summarizing what we've talked about in this webinar. While impact sourcing has been building for more than a decade, the past several years have seen immense growth. And dare I say that there's an actual silver lining to this horrific pandemic. But I think what you would have walked away with in this last hour is that there is, and this part of this movement and growth is there. First, building on our conviction back in 2014 when we did our first report about impact sourcing, about the business case. The business case for impact sourcing is not only strong, but it's growing. Number two, the activities that impact workers are doing, the job roles that they're doing has grown and is continuing to grow as technology evolves. I wish I had the quote perfectly in my mind, but the fact is we have work that's going to be done in the next several years that the technology hasn't even been developed for it. So there's always room for this level of inclusion. So broadening the conversation beyond impact sourcing into inclusion, there are individuals near your current operations who are just waiting for an opportunity. They're also near your partner's operations, again, waiting for an opportunity. And the prize is really in the longer term to unexplored locations where people are really just waiting for those inclusion opportunities. And frankly, the public sector and the nonprofit sector are already laying the groundwork and enablement for us to, as a global industry, go in and swoop in and look at inclusion. So I think the world really is our oyster. And yeah, I think that's really the conclusion at this point. And I'm so excited that we've had such a huge amount of participation in this conversation, and lots of great questions, lots of great comments. We would love to continue the conversation with you, and whether that's questions about what we presented or our call to action, which is really about developing existing impact sourcing programs, developing new impact sourcing programs, really looking at the change management issues that have been discussed and diving deeply into it. We're open to have those conversations and would love to support you in that. And I think we've answered most of the questions, but I want to share that there are a lot of resources on our website. We've been blogging about this work, and what's exciting about this, actually it's my mistake, I shouldn't have had all these blogs with my pictures on it, because I think what's exciting to me at Everest Group is that there's interest in this subject across teams and across every single one of our service lines. And there's a lot of published content beyond the blogs. We have webinars that have been done. We have reports that have been done. And obviously we have this upcoming report, the impact sourcing state of the market, but we have other things that are happening. We're very excited about doing our first peak matrix in sustainability enablement technologies. And as I said, every division is looking at this, engineering and life sciences, et cetera. So we're super excited. I think if we have no more open questions, I can't believe we're going to end on time, but I just wanted to thank everyone for participating and to stay in touch with us, follow our EG Responsible hashtag, and participate in the conversation in growing this movement.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.